Hello and welcome back to Junk Food Joyride. Today we're rebuilding suspension. First up, we're going to start with the disassembly of the old unit. So here I'm just taking off the top hat, starting with the bolts that mount the shock into the vehicle, taking off the top rubber cover. I use some super cheap auto spring compressors, and if you do this at home I advise that you be incredibly careful because these aren't the greatest, but they do work fine if you take your time and you adjust it correctly. Once the springs have been compressed to where you're happy with them, so in this case I've compressed it about 50%, I'm just going to use an impact wrench to just loosen the top bolt. Now we can get into the disassembly of the coilover itself. So off comes the top mounting plate, and then the retaining plate is just below that. Next is a rubber isolator and the bump stop on the inside. Spring comes off nice and easy, and then we've got a final rubber isolator on the bottom there. And that's the coilover disassembled. As you can see, this shock is absolutely shot. It should spring back. Now we've got everything disassembled. I took the time to clean up and repaint all the metal bits just to make it look a lot tidier. Cleaned up all the rubbers as well. So now we're going to start with the disassembly of the shock itself. So I've just used the standard bolts that come with it, and I've threaded them back in, and I'm going to use these to clamp onto with my vise. I'm going to use some channel lock pliers just to undo the retaining nut. And it comes off with a bit of force, but it can be done. And then once it's loosened, you can just spin it off by hand really easily. One bit of advice is have a rag as well as a bucket on hand, as there's quite a bit of fluid in the stock unit. As you see, it's dripping out in a pretty steady flow here. The rag has only just been able to contain it all. I use this little container here, and that catches the rest of it. I place it on the floor. Now all you gotta do is apply a bit of force and the shock cartridge actually comes out. Just be careful. Now I've made a terrible mess. I'll clean that up and get the new shock cartridge ready to be installed. So this one's slightly different. It's self-contained, but it slides into the housing. So it's a real nice snug fit. There's no movement at all, hardly. And with the retaining nut installed, there's no movement at all. The retaining nut goes in just the same way as the one came out of it. So it threads on pretty easily. And then once you start to get to the bottom, it does tighten up, and you'll need to use your channel lock pliers or pliers of choice to tighten it up nice and snug. I've just tightened it up as hard as I could there. So now it's time for the reassembly. Again, I'm going to be using my Super Cheap Auto spring compressors, and just like that, it is compressed. Now this next bit is a bit of a hack I figured out. So what I've done is found an old strop and tied a nice solid knot on one end, and then wrapped it around the spring, and this has held it surprisingly well and has allowed me to release the tension once I'm ready in a very controlled manner. And I'll be doing this in the future every time I have to take a spring off a shock. As you can see, it's all wrapped around the whole way around, and now I'm just going to loosen off the spring compressors. Just going to use an impact wrench to make it a little bit faster. And as you can see, the strap holds it really well. Alright, time for the reassembly. So first, on the bottom rubber isolator, this has some locating rubber pins that only allow it to go on one way. Next up is the bump stop, then the spring, now this only goes on one way. Next, the upper rubber isolator. Again, it only goes on one way. As you can see, there is two slots, and so this locates that upper bracket. Now this can go on either way, so it's very important to make sure you have it on the right way. I installed it wrong the first time and had to disassemble the whole shock and then spin it 180 degrees and then reinstall it. So next goes the upper mount, and finally the retaining nut. And I just tighten this up by hand. Now I couldn't find a torque spec. However, doing it up by hand to nice and tight has always worked for me in the past, and that's what I do this time. So now that's all tightened up, and on goes the rubber top mount. So here you can see how well this strap has actually worked to retain the spring. So the spring is still compressed completely, and as I loosen it up, being careful, you can see the spring slowly gain tension, and it just comes in a very controlled manner. And like I said, be doing this again. And that's it. That's the final shock assembly, all complete. This should last me until I get coilovers, to be honest. Thanks for watching. My next video will be about installing them back into the car, and then I've got some Racer X fabrication parts coming in, so they're going to be really good. I can't wait to get them, unbox them, chuck them on the car, and you'll just have to wait and see what they are. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because it really does help. See you next time.